Hey everybody, it's Al with BobCAD. This is the next episode of our webinar series. Today we're going to talk about getting started CAM. Let's see here. The goal of today's webinar is to help you understand many of the essential CAM features needed to go from part model to G-code. As you know, my name's Al DePoalo. I'm the voice of the AfterDark video series. You can find me on Instagram at Al DePoalo or hashtag BobCAD-AfterDark. Today there's there's four main groups that we're going to talk about. The stock wizard being the first one. We're going to talk about part orientation. What do you do if the part is located in something other than the XY plane, and go through three different examples. We're going to talk about really just one stock type. We're going to talk about rectangular, though we do have 6 different types of stock. We're going to focus just on rectangular, and then we're also going to talk about the origin and different options you have for placing your origin or your zero, your machine setup location, okay? I'm going to talk about 2 different types of toolpaths. I'm going to talk about profiles and pockets. These are common toolpaths. I mean, there's many to choose from, but I'm going to look at profiles and pockets, geometry input, what can you select, different ways to select, start point and direction control. You know, when you're profiling, if you have an open profile or closed profile, where the tool starts, what direction it's cutting in. When we're dealing with pockets, you know, where the tool starts with pockets. We'll also talk about material entry, how the tool comes into the material, getting the tool to start off the material, or if it's starting in the material, how it gets down into the cut. We're going to talk about machining order. So depending on the features that you have in the tree, what order the tools get posted in, the different filters that we have, filtering by feature, and also tool dominant, some of the different options that we have and ways that you can use them. This is a getting started CAM webinar, so we will talk about choosing a post processor, downloading a post, requesting a post, some of the options that are there, because as you know, the post processor is an essential part to your CAD-CAM software. As always, to learn about the latest in cutting-edge CNC programming software, call us now, 877-262-2231, extension 123. You can set up a one-on-one web-based demo specific to your needs and your parts. You can also follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, in all the different social networks that we have out there. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. Give me just a second here, guys. I see a lot of returning users, which is great to see, and a couple of other users that I'm pretty familiar with, so it's nice to see everybody in the webinar today. Thank you so much for participating. It's great that you want to spend some time with me, and you know, I really enjoy these webinars and spending time with you guys. So let's go ahead and look at some of our samples here. Give me just a second to get set up. Okay. So let's start with this file here. All right, now, so what are we talking about? We're talking about the stock wizard. When working with part files, wireframes, surfaces, or solids, one of the steps I take is to align the part with the top view. This is a standard thing that I do when I'm importing geometry or drawing a part or preparing it to be machined. Now, it's not a necessary step, but it's one I take. I do this so that when I go to a top view, which is Control-1 on your keyboard, will get you to a top view, or you can go to the open box and go to a top view. I'm looking down on the part the same way that I would be, or the same way the spindle would be when the part was on my table, in my vise or the subplate or however I'm holding it. Okay, so that's a common step that I take. If you're bringing in SolidWorks files, a lot of times they come in the wrong orientation. If we look at this A lot of times if you're coming in from SolidWorks, our top view is their front view. Okay, so when this happens, you know, what are the steps that you take? What can you do? How can you deal with it? Another scenario may be the part may be slightly out in space and in a different orientation. So one of the first steps that you're going to take is to run the stock wizard, right? So you can run the stock wizard on the part in any orientation. The part can be in any one of these orientations, and we can run the stock wizard on it, okay? So let's take a look at these three examples and how we get our stock set up. So we're going to go to the CAM tree. So you have the data CAM tree manager, as you guys know. This is actually where all of your machining is done. All the other toolbars and windows are used for CAD features. When it comes to machining, everything's done in the CAM tree. There's a tab down here for CAM tree. Okay, so you want to click on that tab. Now in this window, this is a right mouse window, so anything you want to do you know, to load features or options, it's a right mouse function. Okay, so you can click in here, and then we want to create a new job. Okay, so when we look at our jobs, the jobs are going to depend on what software you have. In this example, and what I mean by what software you have, whether it's milling or turning or mill turn or wire, the stock wizard for each of these different job types is very similar. So the workflow I'm showing today is going to be for milling. So we're going to create a job, milling job, and we're going to run the stock wizard. Now, one of the first steps that happens is it asks you about a workpiece and defining a workpiece. Pick a solid. And what this has to do with is when you go to simulation, which models are assigned as a workpiece when you go to simulation. Okay. For now, we're going to skip this step because it's not a necessary step for what we're talking about. Now, when we get into stock types, there are a bunch of different stock types that you can work with, depending on whether you are using bar stock, you pre-machine stock, you water jet your stock out, you have an in-process model where you've done some machining and then you've taken the simulated model and saved it out and used that as your stock. You have an STL file. Or even a revolve profile, like maybe you have a turn part. So there's a bunch of different types of stock that you can work with. Today we're going to just talk about rectangular, okay? So from rectangular we're going to move forward, and then what we have here is we have a couple of different options. We have size, we have enter, we have stock orientation, and we have offset. So the first thing that I want to go through is really just the bounding box. And what the bounding box does is it looks at the minimum maximum of the geometry and it puts a box around it, okay? So what I want to do is I'm going to cancel this real quick, okay? And I have a job in my tree here. I just want to go to my stock and my transparency. I generally run this pretty high because I don't want to look at the stock geometry or have it cloud my view. So you can turn this up or down as necessary, and then you can even set it as a default as well. So let me go ahead and default this so that we can see it. All right, so you can see without doing anything, just running the stock wizard with the bounding box, it looks at the minimum and maximum of the geometry that's on the screen, and it wraps it in a box, okay? So one of the steps of the stock wizard is to set up the stock. The second step of the stock wizard is to set your origin. So it's really a two-part process. So if we run back to our stock wizard again, rectangular, okay, if we want to make adjustments to our stock definition, we can add offsets. For now, we're going to leave it where it is. The next step is going to be setting the origin. The origin is your 0 or your touch off location. So what we can do is click on origin, and then you have all these points that are drawn on the screen, so you can pick different locations that you want. And we're going to start with there. So we're going to just go to this back corner here. You can see we have our x-axis, our y-axis, and our z-axis, okay? So if the part is aligned with the top view, setting up your stock and setting up your 0 is pretty easy. Let's go ahead and go through it again. So we're going to delete that. We're going to do new job, milling job, stock wizard, next, rectangular, next, origin, and then we can instead of trying to pick on this point here, we just click on this line and it will snap to that corner. Okay, so you can see that setting up our stock for a part that's in the top view is very quick and easy to do. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the part in a front view. Now, one of the options would be is to rotate this part to 0. Okay, so what we're going to do there is go to Utilities, Rotate, select all, spacebar, X90, OK, cancel, and now we have the part aligned with the top view. You can see that's really quick to do. Now, there are cases where we don't want to change where the part is located, okay? So that's not always an option. Sometimes we like to keep the part where it is, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to align our stock to the part. So let's run through the wizard. So we're going to do New Job, Stock Wizard, Next, Next, and you'll see that it still finds the minimum maximum of the part geometry. So no big deal there. Now when we go to our origin, what you're going to see is that the origin default matches the world coordinate system. Okay, so what we want to do, and I'm hitting S for shading, what we want to do is we want to pick up this back corner just like we did in the first setup. Okay, so we're going to go to origin and we're going to click on this line and it will snap to that corner. Now, one of the things that you'll notice here is you'll notice Z is going in this direction, and what we need to do is get Z going in this direction. Okay, so how do you do that? Well, within the origin dialog, you have X direction, Y direction, and Z direction, and you use these to align your axis. Okay, so for instance, okay, so you can pick geometry, surface edges and lines to align with. The other thing you can do is you can use these arrows to swap which direction that's going in. So if I click on this for the Z, I can swap which direction Z is going in. See, just by clicking on it, it swaps to the direction. If I go to Y, I can swap the direction in Y. First it's facing this way, and then I'll get it to switch and face the other way, okay? Or X, I can swap the direction in X, okay? So in this example, I want Z aligned with this line here. So how do I do that? Well, I go to Z axis, or I'm sorry, Z direction, and I can click on this line, and now you can see Z is aligned with that geometry. And then I can invert it by hitting that swap, and then now I can switch which way Z is facing, okay? Now I'm not limited to just the wireframe geometry. I can do Z axis, and I could pick this line over here, okay? I could do Z axis, I can pick this line, I could do Z axis, I can pick this line, okay? So when you're using your Z axis, you can pick either the surface edges or you can pick the wireframe geometry. Now, when we use rectangular stock, we put a box around it, and you have points at the top, middle, and bottom. So we put a bunch of points on the screen for you to pick. So let's start over here. Okay, we're going to delete this job. We're going to start over from the beginning. So we've imported the model, or we've drawn it in an orientation. We want to align it just like we've done here. So we're going to run a new job, run the stock wizard, click through the workpiece, next through rectangular. We get our stock geometry to come up. Next, now we want to align our origin. So we rotate the part for our view. We click on origin. We snap to that end there. We click on Z-axis. We align with this line here. We swap the direction, swap the direction, swap the direction. And actually, this happens a lot. Really, you only need to align two in order, because, you know, with the gnomon or the triad or the coordinate system, you know, they're connected. So when you pick two, the third one comes along. So sometimes when you're trying to get your X and Y to face in the direction you want, you may need to swap more than one area, which is totally normal. And once you get a little more familiar with it, you can, you know, kind of know which two to pick in order to get the third one to point in the direction that you want. Okay, so now we have this one set up. We choose OK. So we have our 0 in that back corner, just like we have our 0 in this corner. Okay, so now let's look at this part over here. we have a part in a different orientation, again, we could rotate it and move it to 0, or we can align it with the part just in the orientation that it's in. We do the same thing. We go to a new job, we run the stock wizard, next through the workpiece, next through rectangular stock. You can see it finds the minimum maximum of the part geometry. Okay, so we're going to rotate it. Again, we want it to be this back corner. So we're going to choose next, origin, snap it to the end of that line, Z direction, click the Z direction we want it to go in. And then in this case, I'm going to flop the Y. Actually, let's see, flop the X and Y. Okay, so in this case, I need to get X running along this direction here. So I'm going to click X. I'm going to click on this line here. Okay, so now I have X going in the direction I want. I flop the X or swap or invert it, and then now you can see that one's set up as well. Okay, so this is based off of this corner, even though when we go to a top view, you can see our part geometry is in a different orientation than world. Same with the front. If we go to a top view, you can see that the machine 0 or the setup location is in a different orientation than world. And then if we go to our top orientation, you can see that it's in the back corner. Okay, so when you run the stock wizard, you can align your stock and your 0 in any orientation that the part's in. Okay, so the same methodology we use to align the coordinate system to the part, you can use to align the stock to the part as well. All right, so we'll pick that up in another webinar. The next thing that I want to talk about here, and actually before I move on, is if there's any questions about that, running the stock wizard and setting the origin, go ahead and ask it now. As the questions come in, I'll handle them, or I'll handle them as we get to the end of the webinar. As you guys know, that's generally how I run these. If you have a question, there's a question area. You can type in whatever your question is, and I'll be sure to answer it throughout the presentation. Okay, so with the 6 types, the next thing I kind of want to move on to is with the 6 types of stock, which one should I use? Well, to get started, rectangular stock is probably the easiest one to use, but if you have cylindrical, you can use cylindrical. So really between rectangular and cylindrical are the ones that I'm going to recommend. You can go to the stock wizard, you can choose cylindrical. These are going to be the most common stock types you're going to run into in the shop. I mean, you can have different stock geometry, but if you're running you know, bar stock or cylindrical stock or rectangular stock, those two are going to be really easy to use. Rectangular is just going to wrap the stock in a box, and cylindrical, you can choose cylindrical, but you may need to bump up the diameter. And again, with the bounding box, it cut it a little short. I just go to enter, and I can enter in the diameter of what I want it to be. Okay, so let's see here. So again, there are other stocks that come into different scenarios, but these are the 2 most common that you're going to get into. Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to talk about is setting the origin being the most important part. Now, when we set our machine setup location here, this is, in the software it's called an origin. This is the touch-off location, the 0. All of the positional moves for the toolpath are based on this location here, okay? Now, this is in the back left corner. It could be the bottom, it could be the top, it could be on the part. It really could be anywhere that you want it to be, okay? So if we look at, let me go back to the top. Let me close this file here for a second, and let me close this file here for a second. Okay, so when we go back to this top view, we have our stock set up. You know, now when it comes to editing the stock, you can go to the stock and run the stock wizard, and you can go through the dialog for the stock definition, and then you can advance for the origin definition or the setup location. Now, if you've already run the stock, you can also just right-click on the machine setup, and you can edit the setup location as well. Now, we put points on the stock geometry automatically for rectangular and for cylindrical. So we have center, top, center, middle, center, bottom, and then on a cylinder it's 90-degree increments. So I can pick origin, and I can click on a point. I can click origin, and I can click on a point. Origin, and I click on a point. When you want to set your origin, the first thing you need to do is click origin, and then you pick where you want it to be. Okay, so I did a middle there. Origin, if I want the bottom, again, I'll come and click on this line here, and I'll grab the bottom there. Okay, so those are some of the ways that you can set your origin on your part geometry. Now, some of the common questions that we get about the stock wizards are, why do you have to use the stock wizard? Okay, well, I guess there's two main reasons. Number one, when we go to simulation, we want to be able to see the material that you're working with. Some of the 3D toolpaths use the stock geometry as a boundary to limit where the cutter cuts. So it can be for simulation, it can be for your 3D toolpaths and your boundaries. The other thing that you're doing with the stock wizard is you are setting the origin as well. So you need to run the stock wizard. Now, some users will ask, well, hey, I don't want to run the stock wizard every time. How do I just set up the 0 on the screen, you know, and the stock and just run from there? Well, you can easily, you know, if you have a new file here, you can run the stock wizard. You know, you can set your 0 location. You can blank your stock out. So now you got your 0 set and you got your stock set and your 0 set. You can save this file right here. You can save it as a starter or a template. And then in order to get your geometry in, instead of file open, what you do is you use file merge, and it will merge geometry into this file. So this way you can set a template starter file so you don't have to run the stock wizard every time. This is very common for plasma or shape cutting type applications. Okay, can I change my stock after I've run the stock wizard? And that's really a great question. I've shown it a couple of times here. Once you've run the stock wizard, if you want to make changes to your stock, you can come back to your stock and you can just run the wizard again. You can change what type of stock, you can change what your offsets are. You know, it's really easy to come back. You just go, anything that has to do with editing the stock, you just go to your stock and you go to the stock wizard, and then you can go in and you can edit any of the settings that we have in there. Okay. What options do I have to set my 0 location? Well, so far what I've shown you here is when I'm setting my 0 location, I'm showing you how you click origin and you can click on the points and the lines that are automatically created. Okay, you can also use surface edges, the endpoints or points or wireframe to set your 0 as well. If I go origin and I turn my wireframe on, okay, and I shift click on this circle here, now I can set my origin to that arc center there. Okay, let me I'm going to turn the transparency of my stock down, or up, should I say. Okay, so let's say you know, in this case here I have this line and this line, or maybe I want it at the intersection of this line and this line. You know, if I go to origin and I'm sorry, if I go to machine setup and edit, and then I click on origin and I shift click on my geometry, all the snap points will come up. Okay, so you see the automatic geometry that we create for you to pick up, but you can also use the wireframe geometry, or you can even use the surface edges as well. If you use shift click on surface edges, those will come up as well. So whether you've drawn a point, you want to work off geometry off the model. Another option that you can use as well is using your user coordinate systems. If you create a coordinate system as part of your CAD preparation, you can pick that as your origin as well. So you have the bounding box points that we generate for you. You have the part geometry surface edges, the wireframe geometry snap points and endpoints, and then you also have the user coordinate systems that you can pick from as well. All right, so hopefully that really you know, well explains the options that you have there. Now, another common question that we get is, can I create multiple operations or setup locations? Okay, so A setup location or an operation would be the orientation you're holding the part. For us, we call it a machine setup location. So in the tree here, you have a machine setup. Now this part here, I have one orientation from here, but if I flip the part over, you can see you have another orientation. So I want to do a quick tip here about the CAD environment. As you can see, the axis display is showing, and you can also see there's two coordinate systems plus a third one to indicate what world is. This can be very confusing for new users or even long-time users, okay? So if you go to Preferences, Setting Part, you can toggle off the axis display and the gnomon display. So now, no matter what orientation the part is, you don't have any eyesores or indicators of where world or where the axis display is, and it really allows for a better viewing experience. So I definitely recommend you do that when working with machine setup locations, okay? So what we're talking about right now is multiple setup locations. We have one on this orientation of the part, and then we got to flip the part over, and we have a pocket on the other side. So how do you create multiple setup locations? Well, you right-click on Machine Setup, and you go down to where it says Additional Functions. Here we're going to have some more options. One of them you're going to see is Insert Setup. You can add as many different setups as you want, and they can be in any orientation that you want. So in this case, we're going to right-click and edit on our machine setup. We're going to go to Origin. We'll pick this back corner here, and you can see our coordinate system for our origin is now aligned to the part. And we're going to run into the same thing. We want to flop our Y there to get the Z to come around, and now we have a 0 setup location in this orientation of the part, okay? Now, right now, by default, you'd be in your first work offset, okay? If you were running two vices back to back, so you have 54 and 55, or whatever the appropriate E1, E2, whatever the appropriate work offset would be. If we wanted to change this to a different work offset, we would click on work offset, and we would change our number from 1 to 2. Now, depending on your post processor, that will determine whether it's a 54, an E, or whatever the appropriate work offset is. All right, so yes, you can have multiple setup locations. Now, do you have to move your part to 0? I think we've covered that pretty well, but a common question, a lot of people, older CAM systems, just general workflow, they're used to moving their part to 0. It is not required for you to move your part to 0, but as a suggestion, I generally recommend whatever your first orientation of the part for your machine setup is, you align that with your top view. So that way, when you go to a top view or a side view or a front view, you can clearly see the orientation of the part just like it would be on the table. Okay, so that's what I recommend, but to each their own. Can I add stock to my stock model? And this is a great question as well. So you run the rectangular stock, but you may need to offset your geometry. In this case, I have a single part, but what if I was cutting a strip of them? If you go to your stock wizard and rectangular stock, you have offsets. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do this. With the bounding box, it looks at the geometry, and then you can add offsets on either side. Let's say I was working with a 12-inch strip. I can add 12 to that side of the part. Now, another way you can do this too is you can go to Enter, and you can enter in what the stock size as well. If you already know what the blank is, and this is 12.75, you can add that as well. Now, one of the things that you'll see that's different when adding the stock is when I go from the bounding box and I say X plus, if I say X plus 12, it's plus 12 from the edge of the stock, okay? If I go to the enter value and I say this is 12.75 or whatever it is, okay, you can see that it goes from the center, or actually it goes from the origin. And right here where this says stock orientation, you can see there's an origin. Okay, the origin allows you to adjust the relativity of the stock to the part model. Okay, so and this is important when you want to have stock on the top and stock not on the bottom, or if you want to center the part in the stock, you can use your origin to adjust what this information is. Now, I find that adding the offset values is an easy way for you to figure out, to add more stock to your part, but sometimes it's a little confusing as far as what your stock bounding size is, okay? When you go into the enter mode, you have to pay attention to where your origin is. So for new users, I recommend the bounding box and use your offsets. That's probably the quickest and easiest way to do that. Yes, you can add stock in X, Y, and Z. Okay. Let's see, there's a question, can you set up 3 parts for 3 vices, 3 UCSs? I've not figured out how to do that. Copy 3 parts and then have 3 different origins. Yes, John, that's exactly correct. Generally, what I'll do when I have 3 different vices, let's say it's the same vice or similar vices, the rectangular stock isn't going to work for you because it's just going to give you a strip across the board, right? So what I'll generally do, and there is a trick here that I want to show you. When you go into the origin, it will display the stock bounding box. Right now, it doesn't put that on a layer, and it only displays that when you're editing your origin. So what you can do is you can pick that geometry, which is this blue geometry. So I'm going to select it. I'll go to Edit, Copy. I cancel. So what I've just done is gotten the stock bounding geometry. Okay, so I can edit, paste that onto that layer. So now I have the bounding geometry for the stock. Now, if I'm going to set up, the thing about the work offsets is it doesn't really matter where the part is located in world. The origin is sets where the 0 is. But for what we're going to do here is I'm just going to extrude curves. So I'll just select this geometry here. Okay, so I'm going to add a model here. I'm going to take this model and I'm going to translate it out. I'm going to make 2 copies. Okay, so I'm going to bring this out like that. All right, so now I have 3 different bodies. So instead of using rectangular like I have been for the stock geometry, what I would use is a solid model there. And then I'll pick this model, this model, this model, or whatever the stock is for the part geometry. Okay, so now I can have 3 different vices, 4 different vices, 2 different vices. Now when it comes to my setup locations, I can set up a setup location for each vice. So hopefully that answers your question there, John. If you'd like a more detailed explanation or sample, just hit me up on email, al@bobcad.com, and we can get together on a one-on-one. All right, so we have, can I add stock to my stock model? Yes. Can I change my location of my part model in the stock? So that's another really good question, which I've kind of touched on. So I'm going to come back to, let's go back to top. All right, so when you're running your stock wizard here, right, so let's add a 1/2 inch on the bottom. Let's just add a 1/2 inch on the bottom. Now, again, there's different ways that you can accomplish this, but what I may want to do is move the stock. Now, I could do a 1/4 inch on the top and a 1/4 inch on the bottom. Okay, so that's one way to zero, and have a 1/4 inch on the top and a bottom. I may say I want 100 thou on the top, and then I want, 125 on the bottom. So this will give you the ability to add stock on the top or bottom. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is where you're entering in your stock size, so maybe it's 3.5 here by 6 by 750, right? So now I need to add some Z, so let's make it 1 inch, right? So now you can see by default the top of the part is at the top of the stock, and what I may want to do is drop the part model down deeper. So what I go is to my origin here, and let's see, if I half it, that went the wrong way, so I got to go the other way. Okay, so this is what we're dealing with here, is where our origin is. So it's set to a 1/2 inch, right? So what I can do is add 125 to it, and now I have it centered like that. Okay, so if you're entering in your stock dimension, it's going to pick up an origin, and then you can adjust that origin to get the stock located or to get the part located within the stock the way that you would want it to be, okay? So yes, you can change the location of your part model in your stock. Now, can I move my part 0 after I program the job? This is actually a great question. Once you get some Toolpath features loaded in the tree here, can you change your 0 location? So let's open up this guy here. I have some Toolpath set up on him already. Okay, so let's go into our second setup where we have this pocket. So I have a pocket, a profile, and a chamfer, and this is based on my 0 location being here. If I decide I want to change my 0 location, I can edit my machine setup. I can go to origin, I can snap it to a different corner, and I can say okay. Now when I do that at first, we kind of have a problem because my 0 location doesn't match where it was, okay? So what you need to do is you need to update your geometry, okay? So if I go to this feature and I do update all geometries, it will update for the shift, and then I can come back and compute the different tool paths to update their new location. Okay, so yes, you can change your part 0 after you programmed your job. You do update all geometry or reselect your geometry, recompute, and that will handle that. Now, all right, so that was getting started on the stock wizard. Yeah, there's a lot of features in there, a lot of topics. You know, the takeaway is you can set up your stock for your part geometry in any orientation. When it comes to stock types, there's 6 different stock types that you can choose from. When you're first getting started, use rectangular and cylindrical. The most important thing, or one of the most important things about setting up your stock is really setting up your origin, your 0 position, and making sure it matches where you have it set out on the machine, okay? If there's any questions about the stock wizard, which there may be, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, we're going to move on to profiles and pockets. Okay, profiles and pockets are really common, you know. Part geometry, can you explain more? I'm not sure what you mean there, John. Can you elaborate a little bit? Give you just a second. All right, we're going to move on and come back to that later. Okay, profiles and pockets. Now, once I have my stock set up, I have my 0 set up. You know, I got my stock and I have my 0 set up. You know, I need to have a good understanding of how I'm going to hold the part because that's going to relate to where my 0 is. My next step would be to look at what features I need to machine into the part. So in this example here, if I blank out my stock, you can see I have a shoulder here. I have a profile here. You know, I'm going to, maybe I probably want to deburr those edges or break those edges. So, I want to mentally go through the steps that I would take to remove material and machine the details, keeping in mind of the tooling that I have and how many of these parts that I need to make. I mean, that plays a big role into what it is that you're going to do. So the first thing we want to look at is 2D machining is based on wireframe, surface edges, surfaces, surface edges, loops. So let's take a look at that. Now, all right, so let's say, let me turn off my axis display here on my Gnomon. All right, so we're going to right-click on Machine Setup. We're going to go to Mill to Axis. We're going to go to Select Geometry. Now, what geometry can I choose to machine the shoulder? Well, one of the things I can do is I could pick the top of that model there. Okay, when I pick the top of that model, it's going to return that profile. Let me just adjust some of my settings here. All right, so that's fine. Okay. All right, so as you can see, my input geometry here, I selected this top surface, and I'm able to, the software will use the edges of that in order to do a profile. Okay, so let's try it again. Let's remove, let's reselect, let's select, maybe this surface here, right? Spacebar, compute, you know, and you can see that it's generated toolpath based off of that surface. This is S for shading. Let's remove, reselect. Let me get off of that. Let's pick this surface here. Compute. You know, this time we probably ran into an issue where the tool didn't have room to offset itself. Okay, so one of the input geometries that you can use is surfaces. So you can select a surface and you can compute, and you can see that we do have toolpath being generated. Okay, another input geometry that you can use for 2D machining is surface edges. So we can right click on geometry and choose reselect. We can right click on an edge and we can choose constant Z. That's another input option that we have for 2D profiles, pockets, drilling, etc. Okay, let's see what else we have. Let's remove that, reselect. If you don't have a model and you just have wireframe, you can use your wireframe geometry. This is a chain select, shift left click and recompute. You can see we're able to drive toolpath along that geometry. Okay, the other option that you have is using loops. Okay, so loops is where you can right click on the geometry and you can do a loop selection. Okay, now if you hit S on your keyboard, what you can see here is there's two loops that it's showing one loop for this face here and one loop for the top of it. Okay, now what you don't want to do is you don't want to click on the edge that's shared by both loops. What you want to do is click on an edge that is not shared by both loops, and that's how you can pick the different loops. So you can see in that example, because I picked on the other edge, I was able to get just the top. If I remove and reselect that, right click on this edge and I choose loop selection, if I click on this edge, it's going to select that edge. Okay, so you can use surface edges, you can use wireframe, you can use surfaces, you can use constant Z, and you can also use loops. All right, so that's some geometry inputs that you have for 2D machining, right? So let's look at some other things. Okay, so let's right-click on our geometry. What if we want to just do like a partial chain selection? Like let's say we want to do just a few edges. Well, you can pick a few edges at a time. Generally what I do here is I'll turn my shading on or off in order to pick a few edges. Okay, so if I remove that and I reselect, let's say that I want to do this edge, and that edge, and then I want to use this edge, and that edge. You can pick multiple surface edges in order to drive your toolpath. Okay, now same thing with chain selecting. If we go to chains, so if I turn the wireframe on here and I want to go from here to there and from here to there and I recompute, you can see I can pick a few edges. Now, excuse me, Michael's asking a question. You don't have to extract surface edges before creating toolpaths. You don't have to, sometimes you may have to, but if you have a closed surface like we have here, Michael, you have more options versus just going off the wireframe, right? You can still drive off a wireframe, but you can also pick right off the surface and be able to drive right off the surface. So the answer is no, you don't have to extract edges, or in other words, your toolpaths aren't just driven off a wireframe. You have multiple options, and that's really one of the points that I want to get to here, okay? Now, so, you know, if we look at this, again, we have a bunch of different geometry inputs that we can work on. Again, we'll right-click, reselect, we'll go to this edge, we'll choose constant Z, we'll spacebar, we'll recompute, and you can see we have our toolpath being generated. Now, one of the things that you should notice is, at this point, I'm just focusing on geometry selection. I'm not focusing on where the tool starts and what direction it cuts in, okay? So geometry selection, you know, your input geometry and where you start cutting and what direction you cut in are two separate topics. If we look at the tree here, we have geometry, and then below that it has default chain start point. Okay, you'll notice that with the default chain start point, when I just click on it, it will highlight an arrow, and that arrow is determining what direction you're cutting in and where the tool is starting from. If I want to change where the tool is starting from, I right click on chain start, default chain start point, modify, I go to a different location. Okay, so it picked up the endpoint here, but again, if I'm doing an outside cut, you know, I want to go to the outside. So how do I change the direction of the arrow? Is I just click on the arrow itself, and that will change the direction. If I recompute this now you can see that it's cutting on the outside of the part versus the inside of the part. Okay, so what you'll find a lot of times with the way that the geometry input works is you'll select your geometry. So I'll go with this face, and by default, a lot of times it will cut on, you know, cut in the wrong direction, or what you may think is the wrong direction, or obviously in this case it's not the direction that I want. So my next step would be to reverse the direction and recompute. What that will do is set where it's cutting to. Let me remove, reselect, pick up this face, recompute. Okay, if I reverse the direction just by right-clicking on default chain start point and reverse direction, okay, and I recompute, then I can get it on the outside. Then the next thing I might do is move where I want it to be. So I'll right-click, modify, you know, and then I can click over where I want it to start cutting from, spacebar to lock it in, recompute. Okay, so the geometry you select and the cutting direction that it's going in are two different steps. One step is geometry, the other is chain start point and direction. Okay, all right, are there any questions about that? And there was a question that came in whether I'm Cody or Al. I'm Al, I'm the After Dark Al, so I'll be hosting today's webinar. If you have more questions that don't get covered in today's webinar, you can always email me at al@bobcad.com. All right, let's see here. All right, so moving on to the next thing. So we talked about geometry input that you can use. We talked about start point. Okay, how you can control the start point, where it starts cutting and what direction it's going to cut in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this wireframe profile for a second. Let me remove this. Let me recompute, so I'll get rid of my toolpath. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to isolate some geometry. So I'm going to select this profile, put it on its own layer, and turn everything else off. So we just have a rectangle with some radiuses. Okay. If I go to geometry and I reselect, window pick spacebar, that selects my geometry, right? If I compute that toolpath, you can see it's cutting on the wrong side. Okay, if I go to my default chain start point, you're going to see there's an arrow where the tool would start from, and then there's also a cutting direction, which direction it's cutting in. Okay, so if I reverse the direction, you can see it's going the other way, and if I recompute the change, you can see it goes to the outside. Now the reason why this is by default we set the software up for climb milling. So if you're clockwise cutting, it offsets to the left. If you're counterclockwise cutting, it offsets to the left. If we go to the feature itself and you look under patterns, you can see system comp is set to left. Now you can change that to set to right if you want a conventional mill, so you can swap which direction your comp setting is. But really what I'm talking about right now with the defaults, and you can set your own defaults, with the defaults, when you select your geometry, your start position and cut direction is set by default chain start point for profiles. Okay? All right. So if we want to, let's remove, reselect. If we want to go from here to here, and then from here to here, we can pick these edges, spacebar, recompute, and there you can see we can cut the two corners by themselves. All right. Now, let's see, when profiling your parts, where the cutter starts, how it leads in the direction of the cut is important for surface finish. Let's take a look at how we can control these settings. So your start point is set by default chain start point, and direction of cut is set by default chain start point as well. Okay, so right click, modify. When you have open profiles, in order to switch the end, like if you go to, there's two arrows here, so a lot of times new users will come in and they'll click on this arrow and go, hey, I can't get it to switch sides. Really, they just got to jump down to the other arrow, and that's how they switch the cutting direction. Same with this side over here. If I click on this and I'm trying to get it to go the other way, for open profiles, I just go to the other end. I would make sure both of these are going clockwise cutting, recompute, and we get those cutting to the outside. All right. Now, the other thing we want to look at here is, you know, when the tool is starting, like right now the tool is starting right on the end of the part. We're not using any lead-ins, okay? So if you go and edit your feature and you go to your leads will give you different options to get the tool in and out of the part. So you have vertical, you have parallel, right angle, circular, and blended. You can use a different lead in and lead out. If we recompute these values, now you can see it's going to come in on a radius and work its way around. Okay, so your leads are set within your toolpath feature. Your start point and direction is set by default chain start point, and your geometry is set by your geometry. So let's look at some of the common questions that come up for this topic. Can I default the toolpath settings to the values I use most? This is probably one of the most common questions that comes up. So each of these features, if you start the wizard from scratch, like if I get rid of this feature here, okay, so if I start the wizard from scratch, the default settings for in here, as far as the pattern, the parameters, stock for finish, the leads, you do not edit those defaults, okay? So when you start the wizard from scratch, there are set values that come installed with the software, and you're not able to change those values, okay? Now, so how do you set those defaults? Well, one way you do it is by previously programming a part. Like this one here, I have a couple of features that I've set up already. I can take this feature, I can copy it, I can go to this other job here, I can come over and I can paste that feature, okay? You'll notice it even asks me if I want to use the depth values, okay? So when you copy and paste a feature, you're taking the settings you used in one job and you're applying them to another job. So essentially all of the values that you have here, you know, in this case I'm doing side roughing, I'm using a specific lead in and lead out. Things even like speeds and feeds can come along, okay? So how you default settings for features is by copying, pasting features from project to project or using save and load, okay? Very common question. When it comes to speeds and feeds, how do I adjust them, okay? Another very common question. Inside of the feature, you're going to have tool options, okay? Now, your tools, by default, it's checked for use system speeds and feeds, and what this does is it looks at the material that is loaded and it passes surface footage and chip load. What's more common is to save the feature with speeds and feeds loaded. You just uncheck speeds and feeds. Okay, so this is grayed out. I can't edit it. I uncheck this. Now I can come in here and I can edit these values. Now, there is a built-in calculator here, so you can use the calculator. You can put in surface footage and you can put in chip load, or you can just, excuse me, or you can just come in here and you can start, you know, typing in your spindle speed. You can set what your cutting speed is, and you can set what your plunge feed is. Yes, George, if you got a break, get back to work. This webinar is recorded and it will be made available to you. Because you signed up for the webinar, we'll email you a copy of it, so that way you can view it at a later time. Okay, so if you got to go, thank you so much for being here. We'll see you in the next one. Okay, let me check here. Okay, so no problem, George. Okay, so you can come in here and you can type in your speeds and feeds, as you want. When you save that feature or load that feature, the speeds and feeds will be in there. The other thing you can do as well is you can go into your tool library, and what you can do is create a tool for aluminum or for stainless or for wood or whatever material you're cutting, and you can use system speeds and feeds. You uncheck this, you can default the speeds and feeds for that cutter as well. Okay, so you can set your speeds and feeds for the cutter. You can set your speeds and feeds at the feature level. You can save and load features, or you can use the system speeds and feeds. So those are all the ways in which you can adjust your speeds and feeds. Now there's a question that came in, how do I change the default tool holder in BobCAM V5? What you would do there is load a tool crib. I believe is probably the easiest way to do it, is to save a tool crib with some default tooling, and then that way you will have the tool holder that you want for the tools that you want to use for that job. All right, let's see. Can I force my tool to start off the material when pocketing? This is another really common question that comes up. If I have a pocket here, we're going to just look at this geometry for a second. Let me copy in my pocket feature. So I'm going to just copy and paste my pocket feature. Let me select my geometry. So I guess kind of like if you're going to come in here and you're going to pocket this, this would be an inside boundary. Sometimes you have like an outside boundary and you want to work your way in. Let me offset this with like a wall here. So let's say this is my outside boundary and I want to work into my inside boundary. If I remove this, so I go from here to here, and then I compute my pocket, that's a pocket, sure. So that's like an offset pocket, but what you're going to see is the tool is going to stay inside of that boundary as you would expect, okay? So how do I get my tool to start off the boundary? Well, the way you do that is with the advanced pocket. It requires a dotted line. If we reselect our geometry with a dotted line, and then we edit our pocket pattern from an offset to an advance, what this will do is do an outside to in pocket, okay? So this is going to start off the material at this point. So it's going to start off the material and then it's going to work its way in. Now it's important to understand that you can do open pocketing from the outside in, or you can do it from the inside out. If you have an inside boundary and you want to work your way out, you can do open pocketing in that fashion as well. Okay, so it's supported either outside in or inside out. So that's really the way when you're dealing with pocketing. In order to get the tool to start off the material for like an open pocket type routine, you use the advanced pocket and you use the dotted line boundary. Now, I do not recommend, if you are not doing an open pocket, I don't recommend using the advanced pocket. I would use zigzag, offset in, offset out. Advanced pocket I would only use for open pocketing or when you're using the adaptive pocketing. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Can I helical mill other shapes than circles? Okay, so helical milling. When we get into profiles here, let me go ahead and just remove this geometry for a second and recompute this. All right, and then let me get rid of this geometry, select this shape, turn it back to a solid. Okay, so we'll select this. When it comes to profiles, you have three types of patterns, okay? So if you edit your feature and you go to patterns, there's three types of patterns. There's standard, there's contour ramping, and there's side roughing, okay? So if we look at our let's see. I don't have this one set up for that. So let me go to my strategy and we'll do rough, rough, rough. Okay. The first one we have set to that. We'll do standard, and then this one we'll do contour ramping. Okay. So this one here, this is what we call This is side roughing. Side roughing is a way for you to walk into a wall. When you look at the options for this here, you have side roughing is one of the patterns. You give it the stock geometry that's left on the wall and then how many passes you want it to take in, okay? So what this allows you to do is to walk in on a profile and work its way around. A lot of times, instead of using side roughing, I would use an open pocket instead, and the main reason is this tool engagement here. When it goes from one pass to the next, the adaptive pocketing or open pocketing is going to give you a little smoother transition. Depending on what you're working on, not necessarily the worst thing. So that's the first one is side roughing. Let's compute. The second one here I have is, let me blank this out. So this is side roughing. This one's a standard profile. It just follows the shape and goes around it. The third one here is contour ramping. So the question is, can I helical mill other shapes, shapes other than circles? So yes, you can helical mill or ramp profile irregular shapes. You can do it for slots. You can do it for circles. Or in this case, we're ramping around a rectangle shape. You can use this with larger tools. A lot of times this is a quick way to hog out a bunch of material. Just follow the profile and ramp your way down, okay? So yes, you can helical mill other shapes than circles, and you do it by the profile pattern contour ramping, all right? Here's another really common question that I get. Can I post cutter comp? G41 and G42 never shows up on my profiles. Okay, this comes up quite a lot, and really what this is about is just using cutter comp. Okay, so if I let me delete this this feature here for a second. I'm going to come back and grab this one here and paste it into the tree. I'll go ahead and select from here to here, okay, and compute this shape. All right, let me edit the fact that we have contour ramping. You can see we want to run machine compensation. Let me get rid of these other features in the tree and we'll compute. All right. What is most common when this happens is when your leads, if you're not getting cutter comp, it's generally because you don't have a lead. If you don't have a lead, you don't get cutter comp to turn on. If you have a lead, then what you would do is turn your cutter comp on, or I'm sorry, your lead in and lead out. That's probably the most common scenario that comes up, is if you're not seeing cutter comp in your code, you don't have your lead in and lead out turned on. If you turn your lead in and lead out on, you have a line arc, and it calls the right block in the post, and then you're going to get your cutter comp, your G41 or G42, to come on, okay? So if you guys are using a profile and you're not seeing cutter comp, make sure you go in and turn your lead in and lead out ons, and that will correct that issue. Now, another thing that we want to look at here, let me remove and reselect, and this question does come up quite a bit. Again, it's your start point. How do you change your start point? You go to default, change start point, you right-click, modify. You just go ahead and click on the arrow to change the direction, or you can click along your geometry. It's going to pick up all the snap points in order to change where it starts cutting from, okay? So default change start point, right-click, modify. Your arrow comes up. You can click on your geometry to set where it's going to be, and you can click on the arrow itself to change the direction. That's a really common question as well. Hopefully that clears that up. Can you pick surfaces? You know, when you're profiling or pocketing, yes, you can pick surface edges. You can also pick all the geometry inputs that we talked about. So those are some of the really common questions that we run into when we're dealing with profiles and pockets. I mean, obviously, there's some more options that we would talk about with pocketing, traditional pocketing versus you know, the adaptive pocketing. Can't lead in on an arc correct. George, if you're having an issue with leading in on an arc correctly, just send me the sample file, al@bobcad.com. I'll take a look at it and make sure we get that sorted out. Michael, you had a question about importing geometry off of solids, or like surfaces and solids. Can you machine it directly without creating wireframe? Yes, you can work on surface edges, and you can also work on surfaces themselves. You can use constant Z, or you can use loop. So hopefully that gets that going for you. Jeff, we'll see you tomorrow, buddy, or we'll see you next time. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next topic here, which is the machining order. So let me close this file here. All right, so what we have here is we have two different setups that we've loaded in the tree. The first setup, I walk around the profile, I finish the wall, and I break the edge. And then I do another edge break on the bottom. And the second setup, I flip the part over, I do a pocket, I profile the wall, and then I do a chamfer, okay? So what I want to talk about here is the machining order. So I have two different setups. I mean, this may be more complicated than most, but a lot of times you got to flip the part over. How do you change the order of your setup? What are you going to do? You know, now that I've set up my job, I've run the stock wizard, I've created some toolpath, the next thing to do is to look at the cut order of the toolpath. I want to make sure the tools are coming out in the order that I want them to, right? So if you go on the milling job and you right click, and you go to machining order, this is going to show all of your different tool paths or all your different operations, okay? They're going to be listed here, and the order that you see them in here is the order in which they're going to be posted, okay? You'll notice there's three different filters up on the top: individual feature, individual tool per machine setup, individual tool. Now you do have the ability to click on a feature and you can move it up or down in the tree. Now, one of the things that, you know, can affect new users is some of these items move and some of them don't, and there is some logic that is built into the software. So if you rough finish edge break and you're doing that all in one feature, it's going to control a little bit of the posting order that happens with that operation or those groups of operations, okay? The three main groups here are individual feature. Individual feature will post your operations in the order that they're in the tree. And what I mean by that is it goes to the first feature, and whatever tool that it's using, it will search through the rest of the setup or rest of the CAM tree and post all those tools, okay? It does this per that setup. So you have individual feature, you have individual tool per machine setup, and then you have individual tool, which would be across setups, okay? So generally for new users, I recommend individual feature as your posting order. Usually this will create more tool changes, but it will make sure that the order that you see them in the tree is the order in which they get posted in. For customers that are a little more familiar and comfortable with the software, usually I recommend individual tool per machine setup. If you're in a single setup, this will be tool dominant, and you'll see that it will post in the order that the tool is dominant. So it's eliminating additional tool changes. The last option here would be individual tool across setups. So if you have 54, 55, 56, and you want to face on 54 and face on 55 and face on 56, you can post by individual tool and it will post across your machine setups, okay? So what are, controlling the order is really about just getting into this machining order dialog box. So you right click here, you go to machining order, and this is going to list out all your operations, and it's going to list out the order in which they're going to be posted in, okay? When working with multiple setups, it's common that while the tool is in the spindle, you want it to machine all the operations with that tool, okay? So when you're dealing with multiple machine setups, you're going to go to machining order, and if you want to keep it tool dominant across, what you're going to have to do is click individual tool, and then that's going to post it across all your setups, all right? Now, not only is the machining order important, also the tool numbers used in the job, okay? So it is important that you have the order that your operations are coming out, or the order that your tool paths are coming out. It's also very important that you make sure you're using the right tool numbers for the stations where those tools are going to live, okay? So if we look at that real quick, we're going to go to Milling Tools. We're going to go to Verified Tool Assignment. This is going to list out the tools that we're using and also the tool numbers, okay? So you can come in here and you can change your tool numbers. You can uncheck automatic numbering. It will grab your database numbers. You can come in here and click on what these numbers are. Generally, I do this before posting. If you have a tool crib set up and your tool numbers are defaulted in the tool crib, you don't have to put as much attention on this, but it's definitely something you want to pay attention to prior to posting. Okay. So in order to control the order in which things are posted in, we're going to use the machining order dialog. We can set it feature dominant, we can set it tool dominant or tool dominant across setups. Now, the CAM tree, John asked a question, why doesn't the CAM tree reflect the order changes? Well, because the CAM tree is the list of, you know, we're a feature-based CAM tree, so you have a feature, it's associated to geometry, and it contains operations, okay? So it's a feature-based tree, it's not an operational-based tree. So the order of the posting can be the order that the features are in the tree, but a lot of times for efficiency, it's better to have tool dominant posting. So instead of it reordering all the operations, like it can't, because the operations are attached to the feature, you know, you can't just take the operations and move them somewhere else, okay? So it's just the structure of the tree. What's important is to understand how to change the order if you want to, and that is done with the machining order dialog. So hopefully that answers your question there. What I'm going to do real quick, I'm going to do a little housekeeping because I know I'm losing some of you guys because we hit the 1 hour mark. So I definitely have a little more information I want to get into here. I'm really going to try to cut back on our topics. There's just so much to talk about and just not enough time for it. But I just want to get a better idea of who we have in today's webinar. So if you could take a moment to let me know what version of BobCAD software you guys are running. I'd really appreciate it, just so I know if we're on the newer software or the older software, what versions you guys are using. So we'll leave that open here for just a couple of minutes, or not a couple of minutes, just long enough for everybody to get our vote in. What I am seeing is most prevalent is the version 29, which is great news. There's a lot of really good features in there. So I'm glad to see that really you guys, mostly everybody is running the current software. So that's good to see. Let's go ahead and just a second longer here, and then we'll close that poll out. All right. Thank you guys for that. The next thing that I want to look at here is how long you've been using the BobCAD software for. Are you a new user? Did you just get started? Have you been using the software for, you know, a long time? I mean, I'm trying to find out who we have in this webinar, so we also understand what kind of topics we want to cover and what you guys are going to get the most out of. You know, like I put in the chat dialogue, if you have a sample project, a cool project that you want to share in the webinar, you know, that outlines some topics that maybe you struggled with or, you know, you overcame or would like to share with other users, you can always email me information about that project. My email is al@bobcad.com, and we can make that as part of the webinar series that we're working on. So from everybody's voting here, it looks like it's really, we got a good bunch of new users, which is great to see. We also have some longtime users and a mix of in between. So it's good to see a bunch of you guys with different different times on the software participating in this webinar. So that's really good. Thank you guys so much for voting here. All right, let's see what else we got. Are you on an active support plan? This is always an interesting question for me to ask. I have a good idea of where it will be. I definitely recommend everybody to be on a support plan. You know, it's how we provide the best service for you guys, so you can talk with, you know, Mike or Alex or me or Darren or you know, all the different guys that we have down there, Greg and Matt, you know, so our active support plan members, I mean, really makes a big difference for us. So if you're not on a support plan after this webinar, call us up and get signed up for a support plan right away. We really appreciate that. It allows us to provide the best level of service for you guys. So I'm going to go ahead and close the voting on down, and the majority of people are on a support plan. If you're not sure what a support plan will do for you, definitely call in today and we can talk about it, okay? All right. The next question I have has to do with training. This is always interesting as well for me. What kind of training do you guys, what works best for you? What do you like, and what is the best training that you guys get? Is it video training? Is it books and tutorials? Is it, you know, screen sharing one-on-one? Is it our seminars? I mean, what type of training do you want to see more of? What kind of training, you know, really works best for you and your shop, okay? So voting on this is really important for us. It kind of helps us structure, you know, what types of services we'll be offering to you customers in the future. As things go. And I think video training, it's a real battle here between video training and online training. I personally really love video training. I mean, heck, I create a bunch of it myself, so I really enjoy it. So let's go ahead and close that poll down. Thank you, everybody, for taking a moment to vote there. Another good question that I have here for you guys, this is from our CAD webinar that we did last week. What do you guys do? Do you import, edit, or draw parts from scratch? You know, are you importing and editing? Are you drawing parts from scratch, or do you do a little bit of both? You know, it's a lot of users import geometry. A lot of people do both. You know, I want to get a good feel of what it is that you guys do most in your shop there. We'll leave the voting open for a little bit longer, just to get a good idea. And really, I think the most common answer, and what I see most prevalent, is people do both. They draw things from scratch and they also import and edit. So we're going to go ahead and close that poll down. Thank you guys for voting. Let's see here. Let's go to this one real quick. This has to do with what kind of CAD geometry you guys use most. Is it wireframe? I really think I should put napkin sketch on there because I know that's a real popular one too. But is it wireframe drawings? Are you getting surfaces? Are you getting solids? Is it SolidWorks files? I know SolidWorks is really popular out there. So what kind of files are you using most? Are you getting from your customers? For jobs that you're bidding on? What is it that you guys are working with there? Okay, so we'll leave this open just a little bit longer. It seems like a big mix between wireframe geometry and SolidWorks part miles. It seems like those two are the big winners there, or other files, probably other direct translators. So, all right, great. We'll go ahead and close that poll down. Let's see, is there anything else that I want to cover here? Let's go with what brand CNC do you guys run? Are you Haas users? Are you Herco users? Are you running ProtoTrack machines? Do you have Mazak? Do you have other machines? Now, if you did answer other, and we do run into a lot of other machines, if you could just write in a question, and if you could just label what brand machine it is that you're using there. The main reason why we look at this has to do with post-processors, what post-processors are needed. So if you did vote other, just go ahead and write in a question as far as what machines that you're running, just so we get a good idea of what you guys are using. Thank you, Dustin. Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, John. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Ed. I really appreciate this. Really good feedback for us. So I appreciate you taking a moment to let us know what machines that you got. Thank you, Don. Thank you, David. Thank you, Michael. That's really, really good news. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll out. Let's see here. I'm going to go to this one real quick. What types of drawings do you create most? So are you doing wireframe drawings? Are you doing surfaces? Or are you doing solids? Now, one of the reasons why I bring this up is wireframe is super powerful, and it's really underestimated. Don't get me wrong, I love working on solids. I love getting solid models from customers because it makes it really easy to see what they've done. But even like in this file here, you know, this little cap cover, you know, I didn't put the fillets in there because I really don't need to draw them in there. Really, with a couple of profiles just in 2D, I could have programmed this part completely without having to draw it in 3D. Now, I do like modeling in BobCAD, you know, 29 because of the surface, the solid, extrude boss, extrude cut, and also the CAD history tree. So I find those to be very useful, but wireframe should not be underestimated, and I really like a lot of the wireframe features we have. They're real quick and easy. So thank you everybody for voting there. I'm going to close the polls down. All right, let's see here. What do we got? Okay, the last bit of housekeeping here, and thank you guys so much for taking a moment to answer these polls. The last one here is, you guessed it, what do you like most about BobCAD? And I should say BobCAD-CAM. I just always say BobCAD. Is it the ease of use? Is it the bang for the buck? Is it your account manager? Did you talk to Steve or Nate or Eddie or some of the guys and they just really took care of you? Was it the support team? Was it Walter, you know, staying late after hours and really making sure that your project got taken care of, or AG getting your post up and running? Or my personal favorite, the cat logo is really cool and I love cats. So whatever works best for you. You know, I really appreciate you guys taking a moment to participate in these polls here, just so we get some good feedback from you guys. So I'm going to keep this open just for a second longer so everybody can finish voting, and we'll close this down. Okay, so we have machining order we talked about. Different options there. I want to get into posting real quick. I really try to stay in this hour block. I just can't seem to do it. I got to cover less topics at a time. I know some of you guys are going to start jumping off, but I wanted to touch on a couple of things real quick. The main thing here has to do with post processors. If you're a new user, under the machine, if you right click and you choose edit, there will be a directory here, and there'll be a directory here, and within this directory there's going to be a list of standard post processors. The BC3X mill is a generic FNUC, and it actually works in a lot of scenarios. You're going to see things like Fadal Format 1, Fadal Format 2, Fagor, Haas, you know, Herco. There's a bunch of different machines that do come installed. Some of these I've installed afterwards, but the first place to look is within the software. Now, if you guys don't find your post within the software, what do? Well, you know, really what you should do is check out the live page. I have this turned off most of the time, but there is the BobCAD live page, and they have a bunch of quick links. One of them is set for the post processors. Another one is to submit a ticket. You can actually link right to the post processors from here. There's a list. You can go through and you can download one. If you don't see it in the software and you don't see it on the list on the website, the last thing you'd want to do is to request one. And really it's just providing us with some sample code. How do you post? Believe it or not, this comes up quite a bit. To post your job, you just go to right click on milling job, choose post and save as. This will save your NC to a directory, and then it will also give you a preview of your code. So post and save as, and you can save to a thumb drive or whatever is appropriate for you. Can I make changes to my post processor? Yes, you can make changes to your post processor. Your post processor is a text file. You can open it up in Notepad. There's some really good getting started videos on how to edit a post on YouTube for version 24. Even though it's an older version, the workflow is very similar, and it will really cover the basics. You wouldn't believe how easy it is really to make edits to your post processors. In comparison to other systems, it's by far one of our greatest assets. So yes, you can make a change to your post processor. I do recommend if you're going to make changes to your post, you do back up your post, so that way anything that you might mess up, like I've done once or twice or more, you can go back and not lose what you have. Now, what do you need to have in order for a post to be created for you? Well, a sample program, documentation. A working sample is really important. Documentation really helps. You fill out a post request. It goes to Sean D and AG. They're going to work with you on that post and getting it dialed in. The more information you have, the better. If you don't have the information, if you don't have a working post and you don't have any documentation, it makes their job a little bit harder. So what I recommend, I recommend you learn how to do basic post changes, is what I recommend myself. And what I mean by that is, let me delete this setup here. Okay, let me delete this feature here as well. Okay, if I post my code here, I'm going to get a preview of my program. And a lot of times there's just some very simple changes that you may want to make to your code. You can open up your post in a editor like Notepad, okay? If you come down the block 26 for mill, it is different for lathe and wire. But if you go to block 26 for mill and you turn debug on and you save your post, what's going to happen is when you post your code, you're going to get these blocks that indicate where you want to make, where those codes are coming from in the post processor. The 29 does have a different post processor engine. We've made a bunch of improvements that makes commenting out things easier in the past. It is well documented. Within the BobCAD folder, there's a document under posting, there's a documentation, PDF files, etc., so you can read about what all the variables are. But the first thing would be to put it in debug mode so you can see where the codes are coming from. The next thing is to learn how to edit the variables or hard code in what you want. So that's about all I'm going to cover on posting because I just don't have enough time to get into it. But I highly recommend you learn some of the basics of post editing because it is really quite easy. Let's see. Can special features be added to a post processor? Yes, BobCAD does use an API with our posting engine, so you can create scripted functions that does math. Very powerful features. You can add additional input boxes, check boxes. So I definitely, if you know any C++ or Visual Basic, more so Visual Basic, you can do a lot of scripting and really beef up your post. You know, have a dialog pop up for your program number, op stops between tools, swap it from G99 to G98, table push out location. I mean, these are just some of the things that I can think of that you can accomplish with the API, and it is documented within the posting folder. Can I share my post processor with friends and family? Yes. The post processor is a text file, so you can share it with any of your friends or family. You can put it on the network drive. You can bring it home, whatever you need to do there. Can I cross post? So in other words, can I post the same job to a different machine? Sure. You just edit which post you're using. We can go to a different post like the Centurion, and then you can post your code, and then you can see the format of the code is changed for a different machine. How do I change my tool numbers and repost? Changing your tool numbers, again, you go to verify tool assignment. These will be your tool numbers here. You can come in here and change what these tool numbers are. Once you have them changed, you can repost your program, and now they're updated for the tool numbers. The last one that I want to cover here is, if I change the G code, does it change my toolpath? No, it does not change your toolpath. The product that we generate, the last thing that is generated is the G code, and that G code is not reflected back into the toolpath. So if you make a change in your G code, it is not going to change your toolpath. If you make a change in your features or edit your features on the CAM side and then repost, then it will change your G code. So hopefully that answers your questions there. You know, it's 2:29, so I ran a little bit over. Hopefully everybody had a very enjoyable session today. I think I got into a lot of different things. I really appreciate everybody coming out. If there's any last questions here, let's see if we can get them wrapped up before we go. In Predator Editor, I have a lot of red on Z moves. Is this an error? Charles, there's an option for color coding your Z or X or M codes. You may want to look at what those settings are. Let me see if I can get that open in here. Let's see. So you can see Z shows up in red. That's just to show you that it is a Z move. If you go in here to Format and Colors, you can see Axis Depth is set to red. You could change that to maybe you want a happy color like green. So if I change it to green and I say Apply and then OK, now my Z's are changed to a light green. So that's how that works. Let's see. I better change it back. Because I don't know that I really like that that color there. Let's set this at red. Okay. And again, I think red is just to put your attention on it. That's one of the advantages of the Predator Pro, I believe is what we call it now. Predator Pro is being able to do the color coding. Let's see. Cool, Charles. Thank you so much. Hey, Mike, thank you for spending some time with us here today. Steve has a question. Do you use M codes to drive a plasma torch? And how do you do it? Steve, the M codes are really just to turn like the plasma on and plasma off. That's the main purpose of them. Depending on which brand you have, you may not even need that. Well, I don't know. Generally, like an ESOB or you know, like an ESOB or a Mach 3 or what's one of the other ones I'm thinking of? I don't know. There's a bunch that are out there, but they're actually really easy to set up. So if you have questions about posting, just email into support. They'll help you out with that. support@bobcad.com. Hey, Mark, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Yeah, I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Let's see. Hey, Mike, thanks for the vote there. I appreciate you spending some time with us. If there's any last questions that you guys want to touch in today's webinar, go ahead and ask it now. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up here. Again, thank you everybody for showing up. I really enjoy these webinars. I'm going to try to cut back the topics. There's some big ones today. Stock Wizard, you know, profiles and pockets, machining order, posting. Yeah, those are some big topics. So yes, Ryan, you can contact me directly. My email is al@bobcad.com. Any questions that you have, just let me know. Mike had a question about, I'll look forward to reading that email there, Mike. We'll talk about setting up vices and how you do that. Let me see if I, let's see, probably something like this, Mike. Give it a second to load. You want to do something like that, 2 vices. You know, I don't know. I don't put a lot of weight into putting vices in the CAD for 2D machining. It's really not necessary. You can download these for, I think that's a Kurt vice. You can download it from their website, but it really just makes the file really heavy. It's not really necessary. I don't really recommend it. It looks cool, but it's not really necessary. Just the multi-setups. You shoot over a file, we'll go through that. I actually have a video on AfterDark that I've done on that. So, all right. Cool. Let's see here. Anything else that I need to address? I haven't checked my email yet, Brian, so I'll find out here the next time. All right, guys, thank you so much. I'm going to call it quits for today. Look forward to seeing you in the next one. You know, again, I appreciate everybody spending some time here today. I know you guys are busy cutting chips, busy delivering parts. Again, to learn the latest about CNC, or what is it? Learn about the latest in cutting-edge CNC programming technology. Call us today. Call us now. Call us right now, 877-262-2231, extension 123, 877-262-2231, extension 123. Hey, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. See you next time.